Good morning. It is Tuesday, the 2nd of June. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your morning hit of European news and analysis, live here on Euronews. Coming up, after talks last night, EU institutions reached a deal on what could become the bloc's toughest migration rules to date. Known as the so-called Returns Directive, the regulation would expand deportation powers for member states. Some fear Brussels is adopting elements of the US approach to migration enforcement. By the way, on the trade front, MEPs on the European Parliament's Trade Committee will be voting today on the Turnberry Tariff Agreement covering transatlantic business. Valued at $1.68 trillion, the vote is expected to pave the way for final ratification and implementation of the much-debated deal. And after 2 months of haggling, Mette Frederiksen will soon return as the Danish Prime Minister for her third term. Her four-party centre-left coalition consists of her Social Democrats, the Moderates, the Green Left and the Social Liberals. The government's priorities will be presented today, while ministers will be named tomorrow. Plus, the EU has condemned what it describes as Russian pressure on Armenia ahead of parliamentary elections taking place this Sunday. Brussels pushed back after Moscow suggested Yerevan should hold an immediate referendum to leave the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union. But first, Iran has suspended peace talks with the US until Israeli operations in Lebanon come to an end. In response, Donald Trump now says that Hezbollah and Israel have agreed to de-escalation to scale back fighting. Oil prices had surged just yesterday by more than $3 a barrel. Now, shortly we'll cross live to Lebanon, which was drawn into the conflict in early March when Hezbollah began launching rockets into Israel. But first, let's get the latest from Euronews' regional correspondent, Jane Witherspoon. Jane, good morning. Just tell us, what is the latest? Bring us up to speed.
Good morning. This really is a tale of two sides, with each saying completely different things. President Trump said yesterday he couldn't care less whether the peace deal talks with Iran continue or whether they fail. That said, he still is playing mediator of sorts and peacemaker of sorts. He announced that he has spoken to Hezbollah via intermediaries and secured an agreement that it would not attack Israel. He did, of course, take to his Truth Social and he wrote, "I had a very productive call with Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu of Israel, and there will be no troops going to Beirut, and any troops that are on their way have already been turned back."
Jane, is this just tactics, though? Could we really see more escalation?
Well, who knows? Every day we wake up to different news. Iran, meanwhile, have said that it has suspended all indirect talks with the US and announced that it would pursue complete closure of the Strait of Hormuz, accused Israel of continuing crimes in Lebanon and stating that a ceasefire on one front in general. Iran foreign spokesperson.
And just, Jane, if I may, what impact is this all this uncertainty having on business?
Well, if you can imagine, all prices continue to surge.
OK, and apologies to our viewers there. We're having some technical difficulties hearing there from our correspondent. That was, of course, Jane Witherspoon reporting live there from Dubai. And now for the view from Lebanon, we can head to Beirut and speak to the Lebanese MP and former Deputy Prime Minister Ghassan Hasbani. Good morning. Welcome to the programme. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
So look, President Trump has said now he's had a severe call with Israel's Netanyahu, and now he says no Israeli troops can go into Beirut. Have you any faith, though, in this phone call?
Well, the situation is actually more complicated than this. The Israelis had threatened to target the suburbs of Beirut, the stronghold of Hezbollah headquarters, if Hezbollah continued to target Israel's towns and settlements in the north. And that was basically the condition that after calls between the Lebanese authorities and the United States administration, we ended up with effectively averting the suburbs of Beirut such an attack and the de-escalation of the conflict, with the promise from Hezbollah that they would cease the targeting of the Israeli towns. Yet this has not been really cemented and clarified as how it will be implemented and whether it will hold for a long time. This morning it has been quieter than the last few days, of course, but it is unclear whether the Israelis will continue their operations in the south of Lebanon on the ground against Hezbollah, or whether they will simply cease all operations based on this US request to clear the way for the Lebanese-Israeli discussions in Washington.
And that's the big concern. Is a real ceasefire actually taking shape? Because we're seeing clashes still ongoing despite all those announcements, and also 2 Israeli soldiers killed just by Hezbollah.
Yes, indeed. I think the impression here on the ground is that the ceasefire would probably be limited to not targeting the Beirut suburb, if it holds. But the operations on the ground in the south seem to be continuing against Hezbollah, who incidentally was the one who restarted this confrontation by sending rockets to Israel upon the assassination of the Khamenei.
And what about the Israelis? Do you trust the Israelis to stop the killings? We haven't heard now from Netanyahu after that phone call last night with President Trump.
I don't trust any side to stop anything, because Hezbollah is an Iranian faction on Lebanese territory. Their actions are being largely dictated by the war that's ongoing today, and they are effectively a militarized force outside the Lebanese government control on the Eastern Mediterranean, controlled by Iran. And they are at war with Israel. So it's not the Lebanese state that's at war with Israel at this point. And effectively what the Lebanese state is trying is to de-escalate and avert or avoid further destruction in Lebanon in a war that is not for Lebanon to be part of anyway.
And describe now the situation on the ground in Lebanon. It got from bad to worse recently.
Indeed, it got worse, and we had effectively a cessation of hostilities for about 15 months before it restarted in March, as I said, as Hezbollah restarted targeting Israel. It was essentially a fragile ceasefire on the premise that Hezbollah would be fully dismantled by the Lebanese government. This was happening, but at a much slower pace than expected, given the limited capabilities available at with the Lebanese armed forces. But the war in Iran triggered a new attack from Hezbollah towards Israel, which led to a further escalation that we are seeing right now. So it's very difficult to tell how this will end, but it is very important to know that the Lebanese government has announced Hezbollah to be an illegal entity, the military activities of Hezbollah to be completely illegal. And today it is about how can the Lebanese government control all of its territory and establish its sovereignty with the help of its supporting countries, and to control the decision on war and peace, so that we can avoid such a situation happening in the future where militarized factions on Lebanese territory can pull the trigger at any point in time and drag Lebanon into a war with Israel again.
And on that point, do you feel supported on the international stage, or do you feel completely isolated?
No, right now there's great support, particularly coming from the United States administration. We rarely have this kind of attention at the highest possible level, which is the president in this instance. We have the support of the European Union and the European countries individually to bring about stability and peace to Lebanon, and to control any activities on Lebanese territory by the Lebanese government, so that the country can recover, we can reconstruct what was destroyed, and we can exit from an economic and financial crisis that we have been struggling with for many years, even before the conflict started.
But as you said earlier, you do not trust the Israelis at this point. What do you think their end game is here with their military incursion?
I do not trust neither the Israelis nor the Iranians to stop this conflict until there is a clear resolution to the arms outside the Lebanese government control. Effectively, Lebanon for more than 70 years has been struggling with this, struggling with militarized factions on its territory outside the Lebanese government control, launching attacks on Israel, and Israel retaliating and invading, then withdrawing, then invading again. So this has been an ongoing situation for many, many years that Lebanon cannot sustain. So basically, what we need to have is stability in Lebanon, and the Lebanese government in full control of its territory so that it would be part of the international law and protected by international law.
OK, Mr. Hasbani, thank you so much for taking the time out this morning to speak to us here live on Europe Today. Now, moving on, the EU Council and the EU Parliament has rubber-stamped a controversial law to speed up the return of migrants that have no right to stay in Europe and set up so-called return hubs. Those in favour say it's a smart way to manage migration ahead of big elections in France and Italy next year. But critics warn of a xenophobic twist in EU affairs. For more on this deal, we're joined here in the studio by our very own Stefan Krobe. Stefan, quite a shift to the right here. This would have been a major taboo 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely, Maeve. I mean, the whole discussion about return hubs shows you just how far the EU has moved towards a tougher approach on migration. Remember, 10 years ago, during the migration crisis, Europe opened its doors to more than 1 million asylum seekers. And what happened? Migration became Europe's most polarizing political issue, and the populist backlash never really ended. That's why we've seen right-wing parties surging across the continent, campaigning on promises to cut migration and to tighten borders. Those parties exploited the fact that the EU had struggled with a very simple problem, and that is that thousands of migrants whose asylum applications were rejected stayed in Europe anyway. Governments complained that deportations were too slow, too complicated, too bureaucratic, or even impossible. Now Brussels wants a long-lasting solution, the return hubs. Just a few years ago, just a proposal would have been politically unthinkable in this town, as you alluded to. But today it has become a part of a much broader shift in European migration policy. The message is no longer simply welcome, but control. The EU has strengthened border controls, expanded the powers of Frontex, and signed migration deals with countries outside the EU. And Europe increasingly focused on deterrence rather than reception. So return hubs may be the clearest symbol yet of that transformation, Maeve.
OK, Stefan Krobe, thank you so much for that update. And now for the view from the European Parliament. Coming up, we'll be joined by Charlie Weimers, the Swedish member of the European Parliament from the right-wing Swedish Democrats, the Vice President of the European Conservative and Reformists, who's been working on this file inside the European Parliament. The Parliament, of course, will have to greenlight this file and also EU countries, but it could enter into force as soon as next month. Good morning, sir. Welcome to Europe Today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So I know we've been debating this here in Brussels for months, but just remind our viewers what is in this deal, because some say the measures are rather draconian.
Well, the EU has reached a landmark deal on the return regulation. That means, for instance, longer detention periods to prevent people from absconding, firm entry bans that carry real weight, and the legal framework for return hubs. So indeed, the era of deportations has begun. We're moving from words to actual enforcement of our laws and our borders.
But this kind of language would not have been used here in Brussels 10 years ago. What has changed? Reality has kicked in, and everyone sees that mass uncontrolled migration cannot continue, and people demand answers to how we are going to take back control over the migration policy. And remember, 1 out of 5 with a final return decision is going home today. Hundreds of thousands of people are going into the shadows every year in Europe, and that needs to stop. But the mass migration crisis, if you like, was in 2016. In 2026, the picture is very different, and the numbers of irregular migration are gone down, if you look at the Frontex.
Well, they have gone down since 2015. That was a very extreme year. But the effects, the consequences of years of illegal migration are there. Just look at Paris this past weekend. People seized this and they demand that the EU does something about border control, does something about returns.
But why do you think this will fix the problem? Does migration not need an overall much more holistic approach?
Well, we do have a holistic approach. For instance, we are stopping asylum shopping, people moving through a range of safe countries on their way to a destination in a rich country in Europe. Now we are focusing on helping people in their area. We're also looking at how to make countries take back their own citizens, something that has been one of the major obstacles to effective returns through the years. We are going to use trade, aid, visa policy to get those countries to take back their citizens.
But the Greens, another party and NGOs, civil society, are not happy. The Greens have said this agreement legalises return hubs outside the EU. It gives a green light to the detention of minors and to lifetime entry bans without serious legal grounds. They say fundamental rights stand at the top of the hierarchy of norms, because the EU is meant to be a union of values. We hear this so much coming out of Brussels.
A very important value of the European Union is rule of law. And if we're talking about human rights, that includes the right of Europeans to live in safe societies governed by the rule of law. And I wonder why the Greens won't accept the idea of, for instance, terror suspects getting lifetime entry bans. Why do the Greens want them in Europe? That's the question.
That's a question for perhaps The Ring, our debating show here on Euronews. Mr. Weimers, thank you so much for being our guest this morning on Europe Today. And now, moving on, we can bring in another story now, which brings us to France, where allies there have detained a sanctioned Russian oil tanker in the Atlantic over the weekend. President Emmanuel Macron has said. For more on how ships are illegally transporting sanctioned Russian oil, here's our Jakob Yanis with the help of Jorge Lebrero.
For most Europeans, it was just another quiet weekend. But out in the Atlantic, a high-stakes naval standoff was playing out. Last Sunday, French maritime forces operating alongside the UK intercepted a sanctioned Russian oil tanker named the Tiger, and its Russian captain flatly refused to comply with orders, forcing military teams to take control of the vessel. And yesterday, French President Emmanuel Macron declared it completely unacceptable for ships to bypass international sanctions and fund Russia's ongoing war. But hold on for a second. What actually is the Shadow Fleet, and how does it affect Europeans? Russia's infamous Shadow Fleet is a clandestine armada of tankers that Moscow has deployed to bypass international sanctions on oil sales, most notably the G7 price cap. And the Kremlin has spent billions to buy dilapidated ships of murky ownership that fall short of the premium insurance and as a result evade Western oversight. But insurance is just one of the ways that the Shadow Fleet uses to avoid global tracking. Take a look. These ghost vessels manipulate their registration, switch flags to jump from one jurisdiction to another, transmit falsified GPS data, or turn off their transponders to become invisible at sea. Finally, they rely on the oldest trick in the book, moving their oil cargo between ships to mask its true origin before it ever reaches port. And yes, the EU, through successive packages of sanctions, has blacklisted over 600 of these shadow vessels. But the years-long crackdown has turned into a frustrating game of a whack-a-mole, which simply means that the moment one ship is designated, another emerges from the dark. Which might seem like fun, but for Europeans, this is not just a financial game of cat and mouse. These vessels are in extremely poor condition, making them an environmental ticking clock for a catastrophic oil spill on European shores. Also, a tanker thought to be a part of the fleet has been caught in the Baltic Sea, dragging its anchor to damage critical undersea cables. And historically, global maritime laws were written to protect free trade under the premise of innocent passage. But, as you can see, there is nothing innocent in how Russia uses these rules as a shield to fund its war machine.
And And with that, we can bring this edition of Europe Today to an end. If you'd like to share your view with us on any of the stories we're covering for you this morning, do reach out. europetoday@euronews.com is our email address. Europe Today is also available to listen to as a podcast or read as a newsletter. So do sign up, subscribe and stay informed with us here on Euronews. But for now, bye from Brussels.